All right, we're moving on to chapter 2 of our workbook. Chapter 2 is all about spending money and the mathematics involved in spending money, making sure we don't spend too much, making sure we have enough money to buy things. So all very exciting stuff that we're going to look at. But since we're just getting back into the swing of things and we're starting this new unit, we're just going to start off by doing a little warm-up of some multiplying and dividing. So if you'd like to follow along, we're on page 32 of our workbook. So you can just follow along and fill in the blanks as we answer this answer this sheet, this warm-up together. If you don't have your workbook in front of you, maybe you can get the printout that I've shared with you, or you can just write these answers onto a blank piece of paper and then put them in your binder and save them for when you do have your workbook. But we're going to start by just doing some simple multiplying. We're going to multiply by 10. You'll notice each of these are multiplying by 10, and I think we're pretty good at multiplying by 10. So if we have 35 times 10, that means we've got 10 groups of 35. That's going to come to a total of 350. You can confirm that on your calculator if you want, but 35 times 10 we know is 350. 140 times 10 then is 1,440. Again, you can confirm that on your calculator. 4.90. That's like $4.90. Well, if we multiplied the 4 by 10, we'd get 40, and the 90 cents by 10 would get us $9. That's a total of $49. This last one, before we move on to this last one here, I want to talk about this one a bit more. Where'd the decimal go? Well, remember, if we're multiplying by 10, we actually take that decimal and we move it one decimal place to the right, and we end up with 49.0. So you can imagine it as 49.0. Now you don't have to write 49.0. If you punch in your calculator, it's not going to say 49.0, it's just going to say 49. But we know that actually that comes from moving the decimal place one decimal place to the right. In fact, all of these have done that. 35, you can imagine, is 35.0. And if you multiply it by 10, you move one decimal place to your right, and you get your 350. Even this 140 is 140.0, and it moves one decimal place to the right to get you to 1400. So then if we have a decimal like this, we want to move one decimal place to the right, we're actually going to get 14.54 times 10 is 150.4, 4.40. So when you're looking at your answer, an easy way to multiply by 10 is just move the decimal place one decimal place to one spot to the right. And gets a quick and easy way to do this, to a point where if you get good at these, you don't even need a calculator to do this multiplication. So next comes some dividing. So let's go to our calculator and type in 46 divided by 10, because that doesn't seem like a really friendly number. Let's see what it ends up being. So 46 divided by 10 ends up being 4.6, which is interesting. 240 divided by 10. That one I think is very similar to the one over here. 240 divided by 10, if I broke that up into 10 groups, each group would be 24. So I think I can see a similar pattern. So if multiplying is moving one decimal place to the right, I wonder if dividing is getting these numbers smaller. So this 4.6, where'd the decimal come from? Well, remember 46 is actually 46.1. So if we move one decimal this way when we're dividing, we end up with 4.6. Is that true for this one too? It's 0.0. Move one decimal place to the left and we get 24. 24.0. So yeah, I think it's working. So let's try this one then. 723. It's really 0.0. If we divide by 10, we move it one decimal place over here. I wonder if the answer is 72.3. Let's check that in our calculator. 723 divided by 10. Yep, it's 72.3. Then when we already have that decimal, the same thing, it goes to move one decimal place to the left, and we're going to get 1.232. So it looks like if you move, when you're multiplying, you will move one decimal place to the right to get bigger numbers. If we're dividing by 10, we're going to move one decimal place to the left, and we get smaller numbers. So that's great. This is going to be a really handy thing when we're going to be doing some estimating later on. Now, next, we'll move on to number 3. So number 3 says determine 10% of something. So if you remember back to our last unit, we talked about percents. In percents, you're taking 1/10 the size. Well, 1/10 is the same as dividing by 10. So taking 10% is the same as taking a number and dividing it by 10, which means we should be able to just move that decimal place. So let's try 10% of this. We're going to divide by 10. It's going to get us 5. So it's just like one decimal place moved over here. So it's all the same as dividing by 10. So 180, the decimal place is here. We're going to move it one decimal place. We divide it by 10. We know that gets us 18. That dividing by 10 and moving the one decimal place to the left is really helpful, especially for something like this, because 4 divided by 10 is a difficult math. It's going to get something small. But if we imagine that the decimal place moves over here, then it becomes pretty straightforward that it's 0.4. And then even a number like 15 divided by 10 that doesn't go nicely, it's still going to end up with that decimal moving in one place, and we get 1.5. So the 10% is the same as dividing by 10, which is why we practice these dividing by 10. We're going to do some more practice of dividing by 10, because 10% is going to be something that's very important in this first section. All right, continuing on with our review or our warm-up on page 32 then, you'll see that number 4 asks, what's half of each of the number 3? So, well, I'm going to start with this one. 18, half of 18 is 9. So that's a little bit easier. Half of 18 is 9. Where's the 9? Oh, there it is. Half of 18 is 9. Half of 5, well, if you had $5 and you divide it by 2, you get $2.50. So half of that is 2.5. Half of 0.4, well, half of 4 is 2, so half of 0.4 must be 0.2. And then 1.5, I imagine that as like $1.50. And half of $1.50 is 75 cents, 0.075. You can confirm that on your calculator by doing 0.5 divided by 2, and you'll get 0.75. Or think of $1.50 as 6 quarters, and half of that would be 3 quarters, which would be 75 cents. So here it says all the answers in number 4 here, all of these are half of these. Well, if these are talking 10%, then these must be half of that, and must be 5% of the original number. So here's what we start with. 10% is here, and half of that is 5%, and these are all 5% of that. So good. One more skill that we want to remind ourselves before we move too far into this section is about rounding each of these dollar values, these prices, to the nearest dollar. It's going to be helpful when we're doing some of the estimating, which we'll do in the next section or the next video. So in order to round it to the nearest dollar, we're going to look at that $14. We're going to decide, is it 14 or is it $15? And to do that, we're going to have to go to the 10th position, the first decimal place, and look at that number. I think we're all confident to say that the 9 is bigger than 5. Remember, when the numbers 5 are bigger, we're going to round up. 93 cents or 90 cents is closer to $15 than it is to 14. So we actually round this one up. And this is just $15. This will be a friendlier number for us to go on and use. What about $7.35? So again, we're going to look at this 3. The 3 is less than 5. That the 35 is less than 50 cents. So that is going to stay and round down to $7. And I think once we get to these, I think we'll get some more practice in that rounding. Okay, so that gets us most of the warm-up from this on page 32. But you'll notice down at the bottom, we have one more little talk about HST. And estimating HST is what we're going to be doing in our next video. In Ontario, you have to pay tax on most purchases. It's called sales tax anytime you buy it. We're all pretty familiar with this. In 2010, Ontario introduced the Harmonized Sales Tax, which is a combination of the GST and the PST, the provincial sales tax. Instead of having 2 taxes, they've combined it and harmonized it into that. For HST right now in Ontario, it's 13%. So everything you buy, you have to pay 13% tax to the various governments. Customers who pay for items using cash may need to estimate this or calculate it. It's called the after-tax cost. We're going to move on to, that'll be the second part of this unit. That HST in Ontario of 13%, You can see here's a list of all the HSTs, or all the different taxes, sales taxes in Canada. So there we are in Ontario, we pay 13%. It's actually a combination of the Canada rate. Everyone in Canada pays 5%. That goes to the federal government. And then each province has their own sales tax. And so for Ontario, we have 5% that we have to pay to Canada, and then 8% that goes to the provincial. But we've decided, instead of having two taxes on our bills, we just have one harmonized sales tax, which is a combination of both. So we pay the 8 plus 5 to get us 13%. 13% is a lot of money. I mean, you know that when you spend it on it, but you'll notice in other provinces like PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland out east, they pay 15% harmonized sales tax, which is pretty high. But some provinces like Alberta here, they only pay 5%. They have no provincial sales tax. They only have to pay the federal tax. So that's how we stack up to other provinces. So all this stuff is just getting us around. We're going to do more talk about the sales tax in the next video. But what I'd like us to do now is practice this dividing by 10, which is the same as finding 10%. That's going to be really helpful. So what I'd like you to do right now is pause the video, and I'd like you to try these 6 questions all on your own. Once you've done trying these, again, you can copy the question down on a piece of paper and write the answer out, or if you just want to write down the answers, you can. But I'd like you to try these on your own, and in a moment after you'll pause the video. After you're done, push play again, and I'll show you the answers. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to try these. So 100 divided by 10 is, I think we all know that 100 divided by 10 is just 10, breaking up into 10 groups. But don't forget that when we divide by 10, it's the same as moving your decimal place 1 decimal place to the left. Okay, we probably don't need that in this case, but it's a little bit helpful on this. 87, which is a little bit harder to divide by 10, is not as friendly. We can move it 1 decimal place to the left, is 8.7. Confirm that on your calculator, but I think you can see that. 23 divided by 10, try that right now. Well, you've tried it already. Hopefully you got 2.3. Why? Again, that decimal place has moved 1 decimal place to the left. 47.5, move that 1 decimal place to the left, and we should get 4.75. Similarly, 86.34 divided by 10, 8.634. That decimal place moves 1 decimal place to the left. And then it's really handy for something like this. I can't imagine that you would have thought that you could actually do this in your head, but I don't need a calculator to say, you know what, I move it 1 decimal place to the left, and I know that it's going to be 0.0825 when you do that division. So we're actually going to skip the next page in our workbook. You don't have to put in a big X through it like I did. You can just leave it blank. But for the purpose of time, we're going to skip page 33 and move on to some more practice of the dividing by 10 and the 10%. So here we are on this page now, on page 34, and we're going to do skills practice 6. So we're going to actually move down to example 2 instead of starting with example 1. We're going to skip example 1 and go down to example 2 because I think we've done enough of these. 10% then of 100 is the same as dividing by 10, so you're going to move 1 decimal place to the left. It's just like the question we had just done back here. 100 divided by 10 is just moving 1 decimal place to the left to get 10. So 10% of 100 must be 10. So it's the same math that we're doing here. 10% of 100 is 10. 10% of 200 is 20. And you can see that again, that decimal place moving 1 decimal place to the left. Well, you can imagine if 10% of 100 is 10, 10% of 200 is 20, 10% of 300, I think we can all confidently say it's 30%. So even something like 150, you should be able to get a pretty good estimate right now. If we had 10% of 100 is 10, 10% of 200 is 20. 20. Halfway in between those, 150 is halfway in between those, so halfway in between those must be 15. Similarly, 10% of 250 is moving that decimal place to the left once and getting 25. So each of these is the same thing. 10% or dividing by 10 or 0.1, all of these are equivalent, meaning the same thing. The same operations that we did when we were dividing by 10, right here, we're going to do when we take 10%. All of these are the same as dividing by 10. They're all equivalent. So the same pattern that happens when we divide by 10 is the same when we take 10%. 10% is dividing by 10. We're still going to move one decimal place to the left. So I'll give you a second if you want to push pause again. You can try number 5. I'm going to do the first one with you. Remember that 10% of this is just moving the decimal place one decimal place to the left, so we get 5.179. So push pause and try B and C on your own, and then we'll come back and see your answer. All right, hopefully you've had some success with that. Move this one decimal place to the left, we're going to get 2.784. And even something like this, $498.45, we're going to move one decimal place to the left. 10% of that is 49.8545. So 10% means moving one decimal place to the left. I wonder what 1% is. So 1% is going to be a smaller number. Okay, 1% is going to be much smaller than 10%. Well, 10% was dividing by 10, so 1% is divided by 100. It's 1 out of 100, a much smaller number. If you punch that in your calculator, 1 divided by 100 actually gets us 0.01. So where's that 0.01 come from? Well, if we think of the same logic, 1% is right there. 1% you would think is like 1.01, so there's the decimal. Well, there's actually a couple of zeros before it. We never write the zeros before this, but there are zeros there. And if we're divided by 10, we would move one decimal place to the left, but we're dividing by 100, so we actually move 2 decimal places there to get to our 0.01. So it turns out if 10% is moving one decimal place to the left, 1% moves 2 decimal places to the left. Okay, it gets us a much smaller number. So that's going to be helpful when we're evaluating these ones. So remember, in number 7, 10% moves decimal place left one spot. So for all of these ones here, it's 10%, you're going to move left one spot. But 1%, you're going to move left 2 spots. So all of these are going to be moved 2 spots to the left. So let's try this guy. 10% of 28.9, 10%, we only move 1 decimal place to the left. So you're going to take this and move 1 decimal place over there is 2.899. Okay, you can confirm that on your calculator by taking 28.99 and dividing by 10. That would get us 10%. But when you're moving 2 decimal places to the left for 1%, you're going to take this and you're going to move once and twice, and 1% of 610 is only 6.1, a much smaller one. So let's push pause again. Remember, when you do all the green ones here, you're going to move 1 spot to the left because you're taking 10%, but when you want to get even smaller, 1%, you're going to move 2 spots to the left. So try those and we'll see if you got those right. Okay, we're back. Let's confirm that we get these right. So 10% of 47.12, we move it 1 decimal place to the left, is 4.712. 10% of 93.49, we're going to move this 1 decimal place to 9.349. Let's skip and do all the 10% ones. So moving this 1 decimal place over becomes 9.77. And the last 10% one is here, 610. Moving it 1 decimal place over gets us 61. You could write 0.0, but we don't need to. The 1 decimal places, remember we're going to, or 1%, we're going to move 2 decimal places to the left. So 600 becomes much smaller and only gets a 6. You could put 6.00 or just 6. That's dividing by 100 instead of dividing by 10. Okay, and then here, 620, you move 2 decimal places to the right, or the left, excuse me, and gets you 6.2. All right, so we've completed page 34, and all of that is a great little practice of doing um, doing some multiplying and dividing by 10, and finding 10% and 1%. All of these are going to be helpful when we need to calculate tax, which is going to come up in the next video.